Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really want
to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services, yeah.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren.
WESN.
Well, for once, national security issues are not necessarily at the forefront of the news. They're still there in the background. Of course, there's a lot of things hanging, arguably incomplete, I guess you could say. We are, of course, looking on at what's happening in international/Venezuelan waters. One of the issues I have with this thing is there are a lot of assumptions being made, not necessarily a lot of details or facts, and that is to some extent a fault of all parties involved, to be honest, which makes judging the situation based on the specific pertinent details a little bit more difficult. But at the same time, I would just like to point out that 1 week in, all of the warning bells, etc., and the clarion calls, etc., and to some extent the hypocrisy of the statement zone of peace, if I'm quite honest. Hypocrisy not in the sense of the general principle that it is trying to portray, which it is correct in portraying that principle, but the general hypocrisy of the fact that are we really a place of peace when people are dying to gun violence? We may have reached the threshold, depending. The threshold for a war zone is not necessarily that high, and Haiti alone might qualify. Not entirely sure how many. Anyway, let's not get into that, because we get into he said, she said, and then everyone's biases turns into finger pointing as opposed to problem solving. I just like to point out that an invasion hasn't happened yet, but more on that in a bit. Now, one thing I want to get to, which happened late last week. I didn't see it last week, but I still want to mention it today. There's a situation in Movie Town where a gentleman apparently went to the bank and withdrew a lot of money. A lot meaning $100,000. Plus, he apparently had $3,000 US as well. So that's another, 18 to 21, so that's about $20,000. But in US equivalent of TT dollars. So somewhere around $120,000 worth of physical hard currency. He left it in his truck, parked by KFC and Price Mart, or in Movie Town, sorry. Then went upstairs to Price Mart. So he didn't even just park outside of Price Mart itself. No. He parked in the underground parking after coming from the bank with money, and he just put it in his glove box. And the expected result is not surprising. That's why it's expected. Apparently, people followed him because I believe they knew to target his car. Unless he was flashing the money around and putting it in the glove box while parked for people to see. And yeah, his passenger side window, I believe, was broken into. And it is what it is, I guess you could say. It was gone. The money was gone. This is something that the police has cautioned against. This is something that my family as well experienced, but nowhere near that scale. It doesn't have to be $100,000, right? But you will be followed. You can't just think, oh, my car's safe, who's gonna know? No, apparently they do know. They scope it out. They will find you. So I hope that more and more people understand the times that we live in. It's no longer what it used to be. And to be honest, even in the way back when, that is not something I would have done. And I am somewhat shocked at how widespread this seems to be, because I heard of other stories as well, of friends whose family members did something similar. It's almost like you take it for granted. It's not the old-time days anymore. You can't just sing the song to bring back the old-time ways. Now, we could potentially bring it back, but even then, it's still kind of crazy. Just leave $100,000 in your car and think it's going to be safe. And I know a lot of people, I leave all kind of things in my car. I leave this, I leave that. Now is not the time for that sort of bravado. Even if you're like, oh, well, I leave my wallet in the car and I don't really have much cash, so if they wanted, they could have it. Why would you want to go through the stress and inconvenience of having to get, first, potentially have to go to the police station to report it, then you have to go and get the window replaced. Depending on the model of your car, you might not be able to get the window for days or weeks or months, so then you're driving around with what? A plastic bag or a garbage bag or something taped to your window because you have no window. It's a different time that we live in. That's all I could say about that. Now, and to what extent will people, do not enough people read the news? And then, how often do people want to say, well, it won't happen to me? Or would just not think about it, which is, in and of itself, kind of crazy. It happens because I forgot I had the money, or something like that. You just take it for granted, everything is going to be fine. Now is not the time for that sort of mindset. An interesting phenomenon happened with regards to our political bacchanal. Although this, depending on your point of view, isn't much bacchanal. So the corporation chairman for Sangre Grande Regional Corporation, he is blaming the new highway that the PNM built for the flooding, basically saying that the amount of water running off of the highway, the drainage cannot handle. Now, someone else is saying, Sangre Grande Northeast Councillor David Guy is saying it's the absence of CPEP workers who would have carried out the job for cleaning and maintaining drainage. That's why there was flooding in their area over the weekend, of which the chairman basically said that it is the furthest thing from the truth. I believe Mr. Guy is simply trying to make a political statement. Now, I don't know what the truth is. In fact, the truth could potentially be somewhere in the middle. The CPEP firings contributed, the new highway and potentially lack of drainage or adjustments to the drainage contributed. to some extent in the report, it was also said that the areas that were flooded, it's not as though they never flooded before, right? So it's not necessarily clear if the claims are being made that this flooding, it's that it's more severe than it normally is, or that it caused previous efforts to mitigate flooding to fail, so it was a step backwards, or if the flooding was brand new. It's not necessarily clear to me. But the article suggests, no, this is a continuing problem that was made worse. However the actual water levels or whatever isn't necessarily clear to me. I wasn't there. I just find it interesting that you proceed to blame the previous administration, and then when you see someone saying, no, the cause is the current administration, you're telling him, well, you're politicizing the issue. Listen, what you're saying to the chairman now could be the absolute truth. The problem is, even if it's the truth, to some extent, it's politicized, right? There's kind of no way to get around that. Especially if you want to say this one singular thing that the other political party did is the problem. Because now you're kind of calling them out. Whereas, to be honest, I would imagine that a lot of our issues with flooding is not just because of any one recent decision, but in many cases are a lot of different decisions coming together. How Port of Spain floods is a lot of different decisions over time with the management of Port of Spain that led us to this point. To some extent, precedent set. To some extent, the leeway given to planning with regards to new projects and the lack of drainage. I mean, if you were trying to be apolitical, you would potentially list off as many reasons that you could think of to at least try to make it not appear as though you're targeting any one party. Now, like I said, it could be the truth, but if I was to say my area flooded because of a project that the PNM did, no matter how true it is, I will understand that if I said that, I can't say that there isn't, it should not be interpreted as though it was a political statement. I can't say that, even if my intentions were not that. So then now to go around and say that Mr. Guy's statements, it's a political statement, when to some extent you made a statement with a similar level of political accusations, because again, both sides basically pointed to one singular thing as the cause of the flooding, which has, and I believe they basically either implied or directly called out the political party who undertook that one singular thing. They both look political, right? Again, if I was someone who said something similar to either one of these statements, I would understand if anybody called me out and said, I made a statement that was political. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, because flooding is already a political issue at this point. It was made a political issue, right? We don't necessarily have a very good practice of dealing with issues apolitically. I honestly can't think of one issue outside of even giving themselves raises was no longer an apolitical issue, because the initial situation, both parties came together, gave themselves raises. But towards the end of the administration, the second go around at such an act, it became a political issue. Except notice how there's no attempt to reverse the wrong that was done. None whatsoever. We can't do it. We could keep the property tax money, but the money that was allocated to increase our salaries, that unfortunately, that can't be reversed by our larger majority of government. No, can't do it. It's too hard. So I just find it's kind of funny because it kind of looks like pot calling kettle black. The fact of the matter is neither statement is that outrageous to me. They both say this is what we believe the reasons are. To what extent are either side being politically disingenuous or not? It's hard to say for people who don't know the speakers individually and doesn't know the situation directly or personally. So I'm not going to tell you who's right or wrong in this case. I just wanted to point out you kind of made a political statement yourself. At the very least, well, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. The Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, they are responding negatively to the firing of the URP workers. It's very interesting to see now to what extent you might see different unions respond differently to different situations, right? Now, to what extent is this union supposedly aligned with the PNM? I have no idea. Are they? I say that not because I know something. I say that literally because I don't know. It's not that big of a deal to me whether they are or they're not, because to some extent I look at unions as junior political parties in waiting, or political parties, minor leagues apparently. That's where we reach with most of these unions. I hate to say it. Not all union leaders are like it, but the unions themselves seem to be very involved in politics, and in some cases, they're not supposed to be by their own constitution, but that's a whole other kettle of fish. But the thing about this is that apparently they're not looking for reinstatement. They're looking for damages. For defamation and the manner of their dismissal. And I think this is one of the interesting issues. I have no idea how the industrial court will rule it, given the fact that they are very pro-labor, to the point where even I would argue maybe they're too pro-labor. But the whole point of the dismissals was basically saying ghost gangs and corruption and whatever. The problem is, where's the evidence of this that was presented up front before the firings? Even if you present it after the fact, I don't know if the court will look kindly upon that, and there may be a world where the court will be justified in not looking kindly on, after the fact evidence being presented before you, after you take the action, sorry. Seeking damages for defamation. That's interesting, because the fact of the matter is, the government's communications, you could make the argument that saying that there's corruption and ghost gangs, you're painting all of the URP, and although the CPEP workers are not part of this, you could say narratively by extension the CPEP workers as well, not just the URP workers. But right now only the URP workers are looking to take this course of action apparently, or the union representing them. You're painting them in a broad brush. You're painting all URP, all CPEP workers in that instance as well, as corrupt and non-existent, or not working, or unproductive. And to some extent, it goes back to my whole thing about why have this heavy-handed approach where, you're acting and then you're trying to maybe play defense on the justification after the fact, as opposed to showing true leadership, explaining things to us, explaining the course of action, and showing us why this is the best remedy. We didn't really get any of that. I didn't even know if the CPEP workers got that 1 month severance or whatever that 1 month payment was supposed to be. That's a whole other kettle of fish. Now, granted, this is not a big scandal, but this does speak to the fact that procedurally, it brings up the question again, to what extent are politicians who do not have any experience and proficiency in governance, because there are some very experienced politicians who don't know very basic concepts that are central to their portfolio. Finance. and Dave Tanku is not that experienced, just so you know, hint to anything. But at the very least, we saw similar things from the PNM. why is it that the current administration seems content with not being that much better if it is better? Because that's now up in the air to me, at least in certain situations. If it is better than the previous administration, playing fast and loose with technicalities that are very, very, it's hard not to think that it's done deliberately or maliciously, but it could very well just be incompetence and arrogance. The Prime Minister is looking to push disclosure of forex allocations. Now, I'm not entirely too sure the legality and the ethics behind doing so. I will say this. She is right to point out the fact that the public is left to speculate and to stew on the fact that we don't know what's going on. So it looks unfair. It seems unfair. And usually this is where, you know, transparency, you would utilize transparency in order so that the public will at least have a better understanding and will not be quick to be upset over things that are complex issues that might have a lot more moving parts than they are considering. And it's not just something like a cartel and malicious intention. But at the end of the day, that's where the public discourse and narrative reach, right? That there is some unfair treatment with the distribution of foreign exchange hard currency. Now, again, I don't necessarily know about the ethics about revealing which company does what. Perhaps it should be done via industry. Perhaps it should be done without necessarily disclosing the names of the companies. Because, of course, to some extent, even corporate citizens should have some amount of privacy with regards to their business dealings, etc., etc. It could impact them in negative ways that I can't anticipate. I don't know for sure, right? And maybe those impacts are not enough to prevent you from demanding full disclosure. But the theory behind it, at least, even if it's not practical, the theory behind it, I think, is relatively sound. The problem is the Prime Minister making the assertion that evidence will be found of a forex cartel. To that, I would say, if you don't have the evidence of it, because you haven't found it yet, right? He clearly said he had seen no evidence at the time when he was asked. With time, the evidence will come out. This is the Prime Minister's response to the central bank governor's statement that there is no forex cartel. The fact is, if you had the evidence, you would say it already, which implies to me you don't have evidence. Which means, how can you make that claim responsibly? I understand that, yes, we believe and we think, and I understand that. The problem is, you can't unring a bell. If you're wrong, it's going to be very bad, because we're going to be moving forward based on an assumption that might be incorrect. Bad things usually happen when you do that. It shows a potential lack of long-term consideration and strategic thinking. I understand if the population is demanding something, you can't ignore it. But that doesn't mean you just assume to give people what they want and it's going to work. A government is not there to just bow to the whims of whatever random demand is given to them. It has to make decisions responsibly. And at a time when we have economic shortfalls, the last thing you want to do now is to, we're already complaining that corporate TNT is not necessarily reinvesting its profits into TNT. If we want to make things difficult for them for not necessarily any good reason, and a lot of people will disagree with me on that, but again, I will say, where's the evidence of the cartel before we could act as though it's there? You keep doing things like this, you potentially will be just pushing more and more private investment or reinvestment further outside of the country. a society doesn't work in a vacuum where you could just say, well, it's my way, the highway, you will take it and like it. Regardless of whether they themselves are innocent or guilty of any misbehavior or immoral business practice or whatever, you can't just do things, no matter how justified you think you are. You have to be able to prove that it's justified. Goes back to the whole thing with the URP and CPEP situation. I don't know if that defamation case is gonna fly though, right? Our laws could be highly technical to the point where you kind of look at it and you think, what is the point of having some of these laws? The hoops that you have to jump through are ridiculous in some cases. But all of this points to potentially, and this is not dissimilar to what we've seen from the PNM. If anyone from the PNM that want to kind of wave their hands and say, oh gosh, look, you see, we told you, it's like time out. Right now, these are relatively small scale situations compared to the other general situation. Let's be frank. One of the things that will be interesting to see is what will the current government do with regards to, there's a recent ruling with regards to the Piarco case. The U.S. Court of Appeal affirmed the U.S. $131 million judgment with regards to the Piarco airport scandal. To what extent will the current administration pursue that money at a time when they claim they don't have enough money? They don't have enough money to give you the refunds to the immoral, unethical property tax. Money that was collected with an unethical bill, they can't refund that. They could give back pay and all that jazz. They could choose not to pursue more than enough money to clear those repayments. We have to wait and see. It's very interesting how the politics is affecting legal matters, like the Jack Wire extradition. Probably won't get into that today. Like the situation with the Brent Thomas case. How is it that no matter which government is elected in, high-profile cases like this seemingly go on without any sort of true resolution? Or at least, even if you kind of make some headway, it never reaches the complete finish line. By the time you actually start to even see something, or the accused passed away because the case took however long, or the case was aborted long before it got anywhere. How is it that it seems as though it doesn't matter which political party is in power? You could have a situation allegedly caused by one political party, and the other one is unable to prosecute it to its eventual resolution. What does that speak to our society, our levels of accountability, the capacity, the proficiency of our criminal justice system? There's money here apparently sitting on the table. We'll wait and see. I mean, the previous administration did it over the AV drilling scandal. They didn't appeal that. So I don't know what else to tell you. At a time when we don't have enough money to meet our bills, politicians make interesting decisions based off of legal cases that amount to the hundreds of millions in terms of money either not collected or having to be spent. PNM did say that they saved us a lot of money from certain cases, but they didn't seem to save us in all situations. And last thing I'll say is this. It is reported by one daily newspaper that companies associated with the General Secretary of the PNM, Foster Cummings, received $102 million in HDC, UDCOT, and school improvement contracts between 2015 and 2025. $102 million. Doesn't necessarily say that the contracts were awarded illegally or unethically. But I will say this. It does bring up the question, once again, of conflict of interest. That's all I have to say about that. Conflict of interest. A sitting government minister, he has companies that were awarded, according to the newspaper report, $102 million over the course of 10 years. Your government is definitely working for you. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll go into the first top story of Daily Review, budget expectations. It's on the horizon now, probably less than a month away, depending. We'll have to wait and see, because this is a critical crossroads for the new administration. It'll be very difficult to hide what their agenda is after this budget. Stay tuned. We'll be right back to talk about it after this.
My name is Dr. Joanne Williams-Carroll, and I am the Director of Behavioral and Mental Health at the Community Hospital. At the Community Hospital, we believe in nurturing mind, body, and soul. Through our counseling and chaplaincy program, we will provide you with support and strength you need to help with your mental and emotional well-being.
Give us a call.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Don't worry, we'll find the money. That might basically be words that the current administration might wish they could take back, or at least they will, to some extent, narratively distance themselves from, because it seemingly is harder and harder to find the money. Right now, the Prime Minister is saying that the new budget probably will be read in Parliament in the beginning of October, early October, right? Which one analyst gave me that estimate, and he might just be the prophet. Now, with that said, she did kind of couch or try to give a little bit of a warning beforehand to soften any potential blows, because she's quoted to have said, we have inherited some really bad treasury stock. We inherited a lot of borrowing as well. I don't think we can have a balanced budget, so we may have expenditure outpacing revenues. And I'd just like to say that last statement, for anyone that wants to think that's some great revelation, it's not. Given the trend of our economy and the seriousness of our situation, it would have taken a miracle for this budget to not have a deficit. That's just not the direction the economy is going. And there was almost no way the administration could have done anything to change it. And in fact, I would even go so far as to say, while the previous administration might have been able to set things up over time to have a closer to balanced budget in 2025, even the PNM in its best day is not going to turn things around between last year to this year that we won't have a deficit, right? For anyone that wants to think, oh my gosh, this situation, look at what they now inherit the country, going to be a deficit. Yes, that's where the economy was. It would have taken a lot of long-term planning a while ago, implementing a lot of different strategies, which to some extent wouldn't necessarily be guaranteed to work, mind you. And who could have predicted COVID? So we are in a state that we are. It is not surprising, which shouldn't be to anybody, that they are in a deficit situation. But she said, we may have expenditures outpacing revenues. And she went on to have quoted to have said, government will have to find creative ways to supplement those revenues. And it's very interesting that this is the point that we've reached, because again, when they now came into power right after the election, the first post-cabinet press briefing after the first cabinet meeting was, don't worry, we'll find the money. We'll find the money. Except, again, for the property tax, that unethical property tax that the PNM put on the people. The burden. So we'll repeal the law. But Minister of Finance, thank you, you gotta find that money if you want to give people refunds, because we penny pinching right now. Every $1 million, $10 million, $100 million counts, because the deficit is going to be in the billions, and we actually don't want to tell people that we don't know where the money is going to come from. Because to some extent, arguably, I don't know if anybody could figure out where the money is going to come from, outside of things like potentially loans and bonds and essentially borrowing. Now, the TTMA is hoping to see plans to reduce food imports. I am skeptical about this because you could start things. I don't think you're going to actually see significant impacts with regards to reducing our food import bill from one budget within a year. I could be wrong, but I suspect that's more of a long-term plan. We're not going to just change from foreign import food to local food overnight. Ironically, the whole Forex exchange rate situation to some extent is tied to this issue. While it might not be good for us, the whole talk about letting our exchange rate, get closer to the actual market balance point, theoretically, there is some merit there. I'm not saying that it's the best thing for us to do. I'm just saying we're at an artificial situation with the cost of food from foreign suppliers because we keep our Forex exchange rate at a certain level. We manage it. We manage it basically artificially. It's not left to market forces. So it is what it is. And we haven't been able to figure out how to compensate that for local production and local food prices. So I don't know if we're going to... I hope to see maybe the beginning of initiatives for the long run because it's necessary. I just don't expect that to have an impact within the next year. Reducing crime must be prioritized. The thing is, I don't think the reduced murder rate is potentially going to stand if we allow the situation to kind of just remain stagnant as it is with regards to our criminal justice system. So despite all of the praises, let's not forget the TTPS did say the murder rate is not the be all and end all. When it was high, now when it's low, they want to say crime is reduced. Is it? Have home invasions been reduced? Have have major robberies been reduced? We just had a man lose $120,000 out of his car. Granted, he shouldn't have put it in his car. So I'm not entirely sure if the criminal element is so suppressed to the point where the level of criminal activity will permanently remain reduced and will not have the capacity to shoot back up to previous levels that we saw last year and the year before. So I would say yes, do prioritize the criminal justice system. Certain things need to be updated, but that also includes legislature, not just resources and expenditure. And then there's a desire to tap into the creative industry and the orange economy. Creativity like performing arts, fashion, design, etc. I will say this, I do lament the fact that I do think that our local fashion and design industry should be able to provide more of our clothing requirements, basically. I'm not talking about high-end fashion, I'm talking about everyday needs, right? Just our everyday wear, we should be able to produce it here at home. It potentially would be cheaper given the cost of foreign brands. I don't know if the competition to knockoffs and stuff produced cheaply in places like China and India and Vietnam and wherever else in Southeast Asia, if we could compete with that, I don't know. But if we want relatively high quality clothing, we at least have the creative side of it. The thing is, our creative industry is immature and it's not necessarily taken seriously. Similar to sports in this country, it's only taken seriously when someone manages to accomplish something of their own efforts, despite the fact that not enough of our society is supporting it enough. I don't know to what extent it will really help boost the overall economy, GDP of the country, tax revenue, etc., etc. It's not to be underestimated, it's not worthless, but it's immature. It's not ready yet to take a major chunk of the load, in my opinion. I could be wrong. Now, a couple of things from this whole situation. Government has admitted they had to make hard decisions now over CPEP and URP. That's nice. This is coming from the Prime Minister. But at the end of the day, we have seen other situations where they're making very interesting decisions. And usually these hard decisions, it's similar to the PNM where sometimes we're asking, what is the justification? What is the course of action? And how do you compensate for these things? Because as was pointed out, while I will agree with the fact that these programs should not be long-term levels of employment, the problem is you are meeting an issue, a situation, where for all intents and purposes they are. And to take that away from the people who are actually there to collect a check in order to try to survive, yes, in the long run, you need to sort them out into a proper employment situation. But in the short run, you can't just pull the rug from out of them and say, well, it's for your own good. What are they supposed to do in the meantime? What was the compensatory or compensating measure in order to ensure that we now don't have a hole? Because there's also, I don't know, it's mentioned, but the reforestation workers and the like, I can't remember if numbers were reported, but usually when people bring it up, they don't bring up the numbers. Are we going to see more situations where some workers are going to get back pay or holding out on wage increases while others are basically going to see their job go up in smoke? And what does that mean for the economy, the economic damage of having more low-income people now be unemployed and on the breadline? Because the National Insurance Board, NIB workers, they're going to get outstanding arrears to the tune of $100 million because they've been working apparently on 2013 salaries. Dare I ask, because I suspect this might be the case, have private sector workers gotten incremental wage increases between 2013 to now? But more importantly, while I understand that yes, it might be hard, I don't know what their salary levels are, so it might be very hard. They might need the back pay. But we're also at a time when there's a money crunch. And while I'm not saying that decision is wrong, a fuller explanation to say why some are getting and some are not might be warranted, because the promise was everybody wins. But it seems right now there are selective priorities, which is not necessarily wrong because it's a limited pie. You can't give everybody everything at the same time. I get that. But again, where's the explanation so that some people don't feel as though they've been left behind? We're not even 6 months in. And I would imagine there's at least a small minority of the population that has that complaint. Former Minister of Finance, Coleman Bid, he expects it to be a $15 billion deficit or more. Well, to some extent, if that's the case, I'll believe it when I see it. I don't necessarily expect that to be the case, but even then, part of the problem was the deficit was trending to have been growing year after year over the last 2 to 3 years. We reached something like $9 billion or $11 billion, and they only covered about half of the deficit for the last 2 years because of borrowing. If my memory serves correct, I stand to be corrected on that. If the deficit gets worse between last year and this year, that could just be the trend of the situation that they inherited. To some extent, it's based on external shocks. So it's, to some extent, not the PNM's fault. To some extent, it is, because they were handling the economy in the long run for the last 10 years, over a significant period of time. They were managing the situation up until now, so they have some responsibility of what we're going to see, depending. So this whole situation, I think you have to wait and see, hopefully, for detailed analysis, and it's also going to partially depend on the new Minister of Finance, how he's going to present the budget, what kind of language he's going to use. Former Minister Imbit didn't necessarily have spectacular presentations. I will not anticipate creativity in the presentation side, whatever this budget is due. But the Prime Minister did say, creative means to find more revenue. Well, we'll wait and see on that. I have my fingers crossed that they will be able to deliver, because we need them to deliver. I am not necessarily saying that it's a guarantee. I would be surprised if I'm disappointed. I've reached the point now where you kind of have to prove it to me, because you haven't been able to manage my expectations between the end of the election and now. Let's take a break. We have the ASP here today. Stay tuned. This is Talking About the WS, and we'll be right back after this.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
SM Group International Limited, your solutions partner for the latest innovations, brands, and competent staff to meet your needs. We provide products and services in the following divisions: executive services, event rental and services, power and heavy equipment, construction and property management, food and beverage, aggregate and sales and distribution. Check out more on our products and services at www.smgrouptt.com. Contact us at 221-7445 or email at info@smgrouptt.com. We are SM Group International, your solutions partner.
Remember waking up early just to catch your favorite cartoons? WESN brings back those magical mornings with Retro Saturdays.
Thus, the Powerpuff Girls were born!
Where the young at heart relive the fun. Join us every Saturday from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, only on WESN, the content capital.
Our award-winning show is back, and this season promises to be even more exciting than before. What's Up, Doc isn't just a title. It's a call to action for anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being. Join us on this thrilling ride towards better health on WESN Content Capital.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really want
Respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services, yeah.
we think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren.
And we're back, and it's been a while, but we are glad once again to have in our presence, for your viewing pleasure, the one, the only acting ASP, Christopher Roon. Chris, welcome back.
Yes, thanks very much, Sean. Thanks to, good day to you, your viewers, and your colleagues.
So, I mean, it's back to school. One of the big things, of course, is the situation with school violence.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And the concern now, I mean, this is putting it from a slightly different angle, but it's come up in the discussions with regards to school children respecting authority.
Of course.
Because, I mean, we not too long ago, I think it was last week, had an incident where a teacher was essentially engaged in a fight with a student. And this is not necessarily brand new.
No.
While teachers don't necessarily fight students all the time, either it has kind of happened before or it's come close, or the teacher might have been, you know, assaulted or trying to block blows.
Well,
so that's what I mean when it's come close.
Yeah, to be honest, in the TTPS, we've actually seen this pattern prior to COVID, during COVID, and after COVID. So it's not a new issue with schools. We've always had issues. We have always had to enter schools and address issues with children beating or affecting their relationships with teachers in a poor manner. So the TTPS wants to at least advise parents and guardians on how to treat with children who are indisciplined in such a way that they respect the law and they respect authority. So you have teachers, in schools now, you have student support services, you have deans, you have teachers, you have principals, you have social workers, you have school safety officers, and now, of course, in some of the hotspot schools, I hope I'm referring to it properly, is now you have police officers, community-based police officers in schools. So now you have a plethora of assistance across the board, but we really need parents to be the ones to bring it home and to teach children how to respect authority, because it's from them respecting authority that they teach children how to behave in a social setting, like a school, on public grounds, in a mall, in a recreation place, and whatnot.
One of the things I think people take for granted, because you see this being played out in the States, right? And we tend to like to emulate for whatever reason, right? You see that there are some people who, they will take videos of the police and immediately they're kind of combative, they're resistant. They're not necessarily physical, right? But they're uncooperative. Now, sometimes they might have a case depending on what's being asked of them.
And what we need to teach our children, especially students, is how to respectfully protest. So that is mainly the term. So respectfully protest. So you have protests where you might want to damage persons' property, injure persons, cause some kind of mayhem. And that's not the correct way to get your point across. Maybe writing a letter might be the best option. Maybe peacefully protesting with a sign on the pavement, you don't block traffic and whatnot. So we as Trinidadians need to explore these simple avenues, these less violent avenues, and teach our children how to operate.
Because generally speaking, even if you have a good case, being combative doesn't necessarily help you, right?
Because there are consequences, of course.
And to some extent, depending on how far you go, it could be a situation where, well, you haven't necessarily run afoul of the law yet, but then you actually can go too far.
And potentially you run afoul of the law. And from a simple situation, you created a mountain now, where you have officers now affecting arrest, taking into custody, calling in your parents, and whatnot.
Or at the very least, it could just make the interaction longer. Because I know that there are some people in the States who basically speak the counterpoint of, look, just comply, and generally speaking, everything will be fine. If the officer is doing something wrong, you could report it after the fact.
Report it after,
But in one case, there's a commentator who is African American, and he points out the fact, I always comply, and my stops are always pretty quick, and I go about my day, and I
he hardly gets a ticket. He mostly gets out,
I think in his case, because he's not speeding, so it's just like a traffic stop. He doesn't go into the, why have you stopped me, why are you questioning me? He just, do you need my documentation? Pass it on, and then once they're done with him, he goes about his day. There's literally no consequence outside of, okay, you might have lost 5 minutes.
And in Trinidad, you really get stopped for maybe the reasons that persons in the States get stopped. So in Trinidad, you might be stopped for other reasons, or maybe legitimately a traffic stop for some issue with your vehicle. You know, when your seatbelt, your lights not working, you have a hanging number plate, whatever. So you know you get stopped for something.
And now that with regards to children now, I think one of the things is maybe, I don't know if kids kind of take it for granted, okay, yes, you're still a minor.
But of course.
But you're a teenager. And to some extent, what a 6-year-old will get away with, or even a 9-year-old will get away with, 14, 15, 16-year-old, it's not the same. And in fact, it's one of those weird things where it seems as though teenagers, not even like 13, but like we're talking 15, 16, 17, right? It's almost like if they want to act like adults, yet still have the protection of minors. Am I correct on that?
You're correct, And in Trinidad, the laws cater for the age, what we call the age of criminal liability. So in Trinidad, the age of criminal liability for any offense is 8 years old. For sexual offenses, it's 12. So if you're over the age of 12, you'll get charged. If you're under the age, you won't get charged for a sexual offense. In terms of other criminal liability, like assault, obscene language, you can get charged.
And this is one of the other things that I found interesting, because I think what the ministry might not fully appreciate, because it's a subtle thing. Now that the police are there, you all have to, if something is observed, you all can't just ignore it, right?
No. But there are rules of engagement. So based on the, in the past few years, there came about the Children's Judges Rules. And the Children's Judges Rules speaks directly to how police officers and persons in law enforcement, because you have security officers, you have precepted police officers, security officers, you have soldiers, you have prison officers and whatnot, you have law enforcement engaging with students, engaging with minors. And there are rules of engagement. So you must follow these rules. They're called the Children's Judges Rules, or the children's judges' rules. So there are judges' rules across the board for how we operate with persons who are suspected of committing a crime. But in particular, the children, there are rules of engagement that we must follow. So if there's a fight in school and there are two parties, now fighting means legally that two parties are at fault. However, if one party is assaulting the other party without you defending yourself or fighting back, then you have a case of a victim suspect situation. For the police to engage that suspect, who's a minor, they must use the rules of engagement. There must be an adult present who is not a police officer. So they would be looking for the parent. They might, but in this case, the school, they would ask a teacher to sit in, a student support officer, a safety officer, social worker, even maybe the cleaner, whoever is available, who's the same sex as the child.
Right.
Right? And then you want to engage the child. Now, again, there are certain rules of engagement. You have to caution the child. This is really where you read them their rights. And they are told that they don't have to say anything. And it's simply put across to them. And then they can be taken, if they are arrested, they can be taken to what we call a juvenile detention center, a suite, where they're placed in a suite, not a cell, a suite. That's the term for it. And
because they would have certain amenities.
They would have a bed, they would
beyond
have
a normal
washroom.
cell. Right.
One person is afforded the entire suite.
Right.
Right? Maybe if there's a little crowd, maybe two.
But these would all be minors.
These are only minors.
There wouldn't be an adult with them.
Yeah,
right.
and the station itself that houses these minors, only house minors.
Right.
So you have, in Northern Division, you have Marcus and Joseph Police Station. Central, you have Brasso Police Station. In South, you have Orpush Police Station. And in Tobago, I think it's Roxbury, if I'm not mistaken. No, it is another one.
So if a parent wants to know why is my child in this specific police station, it's because that has the facilities to hold them safely.
Correct. And legitimately.
Right.
Right? So you can't put a child in a cell where they're adults. You can't put a child in a station where they're adults.
Right.
So you must put them in this. Now you can hold them in the charge room area until you convey them to the
yeah, but for any significant period of time, they have to go to those specific locations.
Yeah, they are escorted in an unmarked police vehicle or an unmarked police vehicle.
Now, you said something interesting. Fighting legally is two parties engaged. Does it matter who started the fight?
Yeah, well, the investigation would prove if somebody initiated the fight, if it was a case of bullying, and if the person defended themselves legitimately. And self-defense is what we call a defense in law in the court. So the court, the magistrate or the judge, has to preside over the matter and say, well, okay, this was done in self-defense, and therefore you were exempted from being charged and whatnot. So you should not be charged and whatnot.
But should not be charged, there's still a time frame where potentially, depending on the judgment of the officers, that person who was defending themselves could be arrested and detained.
Right, and no child would be charged unless we approach the officer of the DPP.
Part of it, basically, from what I gather, is it would be pertinent for parents to warn their kids, listen, the situation now is not the same.
Right.
Don't think your child, everything is okay, and you could be fast and loose with the rules now because...
Right. So there are consequences.
Right, because the school might not necessarily... Because, listen, there are always going to be borderline cases where the school might say, we don't want to involve the police. But now that the police are present, to some extent, it's no longer up to them.
It was a great initiative, but hopefully it wouldn't be a long-term thing. In the sense that it should remain, right now, we should see how it develops. It's going to evolve. I want to see, I'm hoping that it is a good initiative in the sense that we bring the children before the children's court. So there's a children's court right by the Oval here. And I think it's Elizabeth Street. And the children's court will determine the matter without necessarily putting them in a jail cell and whatnot. And what it does, it allows the judge to use all the avenues of social institutions and whatnot to assist this child to overcome whatever issues they're going through. So
now,
if the child is a bully, if the child is a disadvantaged child and whatnot, the judges use the appropriate action to remedy the situation.
Now, to some extent, I think a general assumption in a lot of these cases, the hypotheticals, right, is that this is a situation the school no longer could have control over a certain amount of the students. we're saying to parents, assuming that you have some influence, please impart on your children that this is not the same situation, because the consequences are more severe. Now, what does that mean for situations where the parents may be citizens who they themselves have a disrespect for authority and the police service?
The Children's Act 12 of 2012 does cater for the judges to hold the parent responsible to some extent. So if there's damages to property, if there's injuries incurred or suffered by parties, the parent could be held liable. So the Act itself caters for the judge to administer any kind of punishment on the parent for any consequence that that the child.
So if the parent, basically it could be proven that they themselves did not properly guide the child.
Yeah, the judge has to make a decision.
The judge could include them.
The judge could do that, yeah.
And then, of course, then there's the added dimension. It's been debated in very, generally speaking, I think most people are very wary of police officers being armed in schools.
Yeah.
The one caveat to that, I would say, is for schools that are near hotspots where they have had gunfire exchange in proximity to schools, I personally think maybe those officers should be armed. The Prime Minister did say she's leaving it up to the officers and maybe supervisors to make that decision, which I believe is the best decision.
Best case, when you look at the best practice rules, they should be in plain clothes. And if they do have a firearm, it should be hidden. So it should be a concealed weapon, as opposed to an open carry weapon, like in a holster. It should be holstered at all times in a concealed manner.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because I would have also imagined that maybe the impact of uniformed officers in the school might have made a difference. But
well, maybe, I don't know, the intention of having them in uniform is to have that authoritative impact on them.
Because
for some reason, like when I was working in the task force and the CID, we've always had to patrol near schools, because for some reason when you suspend a child, they feel it necessary during the school hours to come back to the school and hang out outside the school to interact with their peers for some reason. So when they're in the school during normal school hours, they're not suspended, they're not expelled. They want to leave the school, break school and get out of the school, and they cause chaos. But and for some reason, when they are expelled or suspended, I see them coming back to the school. I would have oftentimes to ask them to leave in a nice way. You know, you've been expelled or suspended, you need to leave here. Unless you're waiting for a sibling or whatnot.
Right, okay. I have another question to ask, but we have Digger Martin waiting, so we'll take the call. Good morning, caller, you on here?
Good morning, Sean and Officer Arun, ASP.
Really?
Being the 550 is a stakeholder in all of this, particularly to help move the TTPS forward. I usually share my views, which I don't believe they are offensive, but they are critical analysis of what I'm seeing in the police service that hopefully they'll take on board to help improve. I want to congratulate the TTPS for two recent issues that I thought was extremely good. Rapid response.
Right.
And it has to do with jewelry. In front of the breakfast shed about, I think 2 days ago, 3 days ago, grabbed someone's chain, and within minutes, the police, ITF, everybody intercept the criminals somewhere down in front of Beatam there, and it was what they call a Trinidad artist. So that was excellent. Coming back to the Beria issue, remember the response for the former minister? They got the Beria, but they didn't get. It's only after, I think, negotiation with something they get it. There was a Beria incident right in front of Chagonas yesterday, and within 3 or 4 minutes, rapid response again, and they got it. So that is what I believe has to flood the newspaper, everything about the change in the mindset of the police. As soon as something happens and we provide them with information, we see the police acting. Despite none of the phones in the police station, a lot of them not functioning. The second issue, ASP Hernandez, the former inspector of SORT, I see he has been reunited within the TTPS in Chagonas. From all I have seen on him on the newspaper, I think he will complement the present Commissioner of Police. Now, as I said, I want to critically analyze what is happening in the police. And I had a read of his judgment. And one of the issues he had with the TTPS for charging him and arresting him and bringing him before the court, he put into the public discourse that he applied for the DCP position and there were people within the framework of promoting officers and they might have infringed his success. I want to know if you are aware of any investigation that is taking place to determine the veracity of what was in the newspaper with respect to ASP Hernandez now, because he's in Shogunas, and I believe I'm seeing him all over the base. He's proactive. He's investigating the kidnapping person. So that is one of the issues that the TTPS has to cleanse itself. I know the Commissioner of Police saying he's not burying his head in his sand with respect to errant officers. But it appears it would have been senior officers who taken that action against ASP Hernandez. I listen off here.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, I'm not aware of any ongoing investigation.
I think the problem with that caller is you would need a lot more details and analysis of what was done to him, what was done in other officers in that situation.
I didn't even know he applied for the DCP.
Right. Well, I think he was part of the promotion with the ASP, the acting ASPs.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
Right?
Right.
So again,
well, that's totally different.
Yeah, that's totally different.
Yeah.
But my point is there's a wider issue with regards to promotions, at least from the public's point of view.
Yeah.
Right? But to say that specifically his desire to be a DCP was stymied by the higher-ups, to some extent, his substantial rank, I believe, would be inspector if he's acting SP. So to jump from inspector to DCP, like that's not the jump with the commissioner and with a couple other DCPs was from the superintendent or senior superintendent rank. So
in this case,
right?
But it was open to members of the public, so it doesn't necessarily mean you were or you had to be a senior police officer.
But I'm sure there would have been a lot of other people who applied as well.
Correct, yeah.
You kind of have to prove that he was, and maybe others were mistreated.
Yeah.
So it might take...
But the position of DCP is a promoted position.
Yeah.
So they are promoted.
Yeah, so in his case, it's not as though he was passed over by a junior. He would have been junior to the others who were promoted. So you can't necessarily use that there to add some weight to the accusation. And without more details, it's difficult for us to kind of... I'm not saying he's lying. I'm just saying we don't have enough to move or to say with any authority what did or did not happen. Right?
Well, on the page of what the caller was speaking about in terms of the reaction time of the police, in terms of how they responded to these reports. Port of Spain is heavily guarded, of course, and we have a lot of patrols in the area. We've ramped up patrols across the country, especially in the Port of Spain area, the snatchings and the larcenies.
This is the first time we've seen rapid response in Port of Spain.
No, of course not. And but it depends on how the information gets to us. So, the caller mentioned that, you don't get through to the station. You have the option of calling 999. In this case, it sounds like an emergency. You call 999 and the information gets out to us via wireless. We do have, WhatsApp and phone calls and whatever other technologies, but it does come across faster via the wireless sets. And we send out all points bulletin on the person's description and what occurred and where it happened and whatnot. And we have the 10 codes, so you may not hear it necessarily on the set what I hear. So I'm trained to listen to the codes and know exactly what offense took place and whatnot and how to respond and whatnot.
Is it in part because of the SOE? That's how you get this increased presence that can react faster?
It's difficult to say in the sense that we've been in SOE since January. I believe it's January.
Basically, there was some time in between.
Yeah. So we've always been trying to ramp up the response time based on the last commissioner's mandate to increase response time.
So the other thing is this, given the fact that meters are down for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's going to hold after the SOE or not, they are down right now. Is that helping response time because you just don't have these major?
Of course, because police officers often have a lot of reports to attend to. And I must commend, he spoke about the Shogunas police station. I would have been in conversation with officers at the Shogunas police station over the weekend, and I would have heard some of the investigations they're doing, and it's a lot of investigations they have to undertake. Some that are fruitful, some are still under investigation, some that are not fruitful as yet.
Right.
And when you recognize how the amount of their workload, I was speaking to Sergeant, I think it's Babulal, and I think he's acting sergeant, and he was speaking in terms of some cases that they had to deal with, and he was letting me know how it evolved and how, you know, how the police intelligence gathering affected those reports, and they were able to solve very easily some of these reports. And you hear the kind of workload they have, and when you have murders upon murders upon murders, and it's calming down now, hopefully, and it's lesser and lesser, then we are able to respond to the other reports, the larcenies.
Yeah.
We are able to properly investigate the other reports.
Because when there's a murder, at least some amount of police officers have to respond to that.
It takes
precedence.
It involves all police officers coming into the area, taking statements. We take statements immediately. So when there's a murder here now, what we do, we initiate an investigation immediately. We take statements from all witnesses as soon as possible. Sometimes right on the scene, you see officers standing next to a vehicle and they sit down, or they're standing and they're taking a statement. And this is how we produce the evidence before the court. Then we have to look for CCTV footage, and CCTV footage is based on the perimeter. So the wider the perimeter, the easier it is for us to solve these murders.
And that's the thing, response times matter. Right, which is why if there's a robbery, you'll ideally respond as soon as possible.
Right.
But if there's a murder, that has to take precedence.
Yeah, and the caller also highlighted that he would have liked to see more of this in the media. And I was speaking to an officer from homicide last week, Officer Nunez. I can't remember, his SRP officer, I believe. And he was explaining he had just finished charging somebody for homicide the week before. And you didn't hear about this on the media.
No,
And this was excellent work, and he explained how he went about it. And whatnot, and we were preparing some statements for another matter.
I think the problem is it's very easy to report on the incident, especially murders, because it's very public. But the follow-up of the charges and stuff, that's not as public.
Yeah, because you might have a murder taking place in 2024 and might be solved until 2025.
Right.
Yeah, and it's amazing how homicide does operate. I mean, I've actually had witnessed these investigations myself when I actually had conversation with some of these officers from CSI and how they solve some of these murders. And excellent work. You won't believe that the extent they go through, especially with homicides. But nonetheless, they try to emulate this type of investigation for all other matters. The larcenies, the robberies with violence, the home invasions, as Trinidadians call it. These are robberies with violence and whatnot. The housebreaking and larcenies and whatnot.
I think the problem is it got out of control, just the amount of crime, and that speaks to the whole system itself. Now, we do have a comment to refer to, if you could put it up. Do you believe the current laws in TNT sufficiently hold parents accountable for their child's violent behavior in schools? And this is, I think, to some extent, a little bit of a new phenomenon where more and more, I believe, in certain parts of the world, they're like, no, hold the parents accountable, because you're kind of seeing a trend of, you know, children being more and more extra, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and in the past 2 weeks, you have seen a state, I think it's Florida, one of these states in America, actually passing laws to hold parents accountable. What I would like to see is the same thing happening in Trinidad, because although we have laws for the judges to hold them accountable in some regard, in some issues, I think they should be held accountable across the board, especially for how their children behave.
But what if you have a case, because there's always exceptions to every rule when it comes to humans. Humans are very diverse. You know, you can't put the entire society into one neat box, right? There will be parents who are literally trying their best, but circumstances, whether it is the fact they have to work 3 jobs and they just can't be physically present to monitor the child, or they are present, but the child is willfully ignoring them and rebelling against them. And it reaches a point where, well, the parent isn't necessarily ready to abandon them, but they're out of options. In cases like that, I mean, you could understand the need for leeway.
I understand. I mean, and parents could probably, I mean, I as a parent would not want to do it. I guess a number of parents won't want to do it, but you can't put your child before the court and so that you can have them have access to avenues to discipline them and whatnot. I think that this should be a more open forum for parents to utilize in terms of, like, let me say, a boot camp or some avenue that they could put the child somewhere because they're not listening.
For those parents in situations like that, though, because you said it yourself, it's not your first instinct to let your child feel the full consequence of their actions.
Yeah.
But you could argue there's an argument, sorry for my ungraceful use of language. You could argue that there's an argument that it's better to kind of take this very bitter medicine now because
at a young
they could
age,
get worse.
It could get worse.
Right?
And we've actually seen that. You've seen where children evolve from simple matters of indiscipline to criminal behavior. And this is where the parenting skills has to come in. You must parent responsibly. I'm sorry to use that term, parent responsibly, because I'm not to blame a parent for how they parent. But nonetheless, they need to pay more attention to their child, as opposed, yes, you have 3 jobs, but you also made a commitment to having a child.
Yeah.
You didn't accidentally have a child. You wanted to have a child, you had a child. Whether it was by accident or not, you should understand that you are a parent now, and you have to take responsibility for that child.
Whatever you have to do, you have to do. There's a clip that went kind of viral where I believe it was basically the grandfather told the police, well, no, lock up my daughter because she was driving drunk with the grandchild in the car.
Yeah.
And like, I don't care, consequences. We have Faisal on the line. Good morning, caller, on there.
Good morning, Sean. Good morning, Officer Aaron.
Good morning. How are you doing?
First, I want to congratulate the CTTS on the efforts they are making to put a dent on crime and criminality. We are not only seeing, but we are feeling the presence of the police. The case is coming to a little bit of calm, and I want to say thank you all very much for that. Yeah. With respect to, Sean, I want to touch on a small issue with you and the URP and what you would have been discussing this morning. Now, I think the URP would have moved away from its mooring, meaning the intent of the program. So when the matter goes before the court, as some people are suggesting, rightfully or wrongfully so, I am thinking that the judge will now revisit that. And you see what unemployment is a relief. It's a relief. Maybe it was mismanaged and allowed to get out of control. But as far as the law goes, I think the learned judge or judges would revisit what the intent of the program was.
Yeah.
So, we have to, that and CTEP as well, not only URP, but CTEP. And clearly, there's evidence enough that would suggest that it has gone wild.
Yes.
The other thing I want to touch on, Officer Aaron, is that, in order to bring some discipline to society, I think that the police service must now look, especially on the school transport, private school transport, where you have drivers playing lewd music, obscene music, and very loud while they are transporting the kids. And I think if we start from that angle, we'll be able to bring some relief, and put things in order. We have to start there, and I think we'll reach to it. With respect to the marijuana smoking in public, forgive me, but I think the police service is not doing a very good job with respect to that. They are not doing a very good job. Because I would have seen, I own a business. And, people would come outside my business place and light up marijuana. I run a retail outlet.
Yeah.
And it's a shop, so you know what's happening. You have little children coming in and out. And oftentimes I draw it to the attention that fellas smoking the marijuana. And they become very abusive. So we as business people need the assistance of the police.
Yeah.
You know what? You're putting us in a precarious position.
Yeah.
You're telling us it is unlawful to use it in public. And wherever we try to protect our property, we are being abused. So I think all they need to step up in the game with respect to that, the loud music in school buses generally, and the use of marijuana in public.
Yeah.
Thank you, well.
Yeah, well, on those 2 issues, of course, we do have considerable data that does indicate that officers are issuing a lot of fixed penalty notices. We actually seen an officer.
For public smoking?
No, for the
music.
The music,
Right.
because we've seen an officer receiving an award, I forgot his name, from the South Traffic Branch Unit. And he had issued so many tickets, I think it was amounted to over $100,000, if I'm not mistaken. So we have officers issuing tickets. People are paying the tickets nonetheless, but issuing tickets for these cases. So it's just one angle. He said he wanted us to start from that angle, but that's just one angle. That's one avenue of addressing the discipline and delinquency and whatnot. He did speak about the marijuana smoking, but as we know, we did indicate you can be arrested for possession of marijuana within 500 meters of a school, whether the possession is aggravated or not. You are within 500 meters of a school, you can be arrested for trafficking marijuana. However, in terms of smoking a small quantity of marijuana in a public space, you can be issued a ticket. So there's nothing the police can do in terms of arresting you. If you are a minor, the officers can seize any cigarette from the minor.
I think the long and short,
taking them into custody.
The long and short call is the laws around marijuana usage probably could be better clarified, expanded, tightened, modified in some way.
He did make a point though that he's seen it happening around students or children. Right. Under the Children's Act 12 of 2012, it does speak about using dangerous drugs, or the term they use is exposing a child to narcotics. So it is an avenue for officers to arrest a suspect if they are smoking marijuana. Of course, you'll have to prove it's marijuana.
In proximity
of
to
a
children.
Student. Yeah, I'm sorry, a child.
Even if it is not necessarily, well, I believe it's an establishment children will regularly frequent.
Yeah, so the officer must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was the intention of the person to expose the child to narcotics.
I think the thing with the music, not just as are you flouting laws with regards to noise pollution and volume levels, but also, look, at the end of the day, while I'm not necessarily want to say video games and movies and music will cause children to be criminals outright.
No.
But if you're still breaking the rules, and by breaking the rules, you're basically indirectly teaching children you could break certain rules.
No, but exactly, and it's a perfect example on the topic we spoke about initially. Following the rules as adults.
Yes.
And having children follow the same rules. So
exactly.
If we are smoking marijuana in public, in front of children, and we don't want them to grow up in the same methodology, why are we doing it in front of them?
Well, for some of those smokers, they don't care about that.
Yeah. Now, it might be an issue of culture, and you want to bring up a child in that culture. I may or may not understand that. However, when we're talking about a public space, this is not your home. This is public space, and you have to abide by the social rules of not smoking in a public place.
All right, let's take the next comment in line first. Governments worldwide must construct affordable, readily available housing units. The unemployed must be able to meet the basic cost of living expenses, this and much more. I'll just say this. It's a catch-22 if government has to do it, because while government will have the strongest social motivation to help the people, there's also NGOs, there's also potentially, depending on what incentives for corporations to do it, right? The problem is governments are also, they have the strongest incentive, they're also one of the least efficient bodies to do anything. So that's the catch. If you insist your government to do a thing, you're going to get inefficiencies, you're going to get wasted money, you're going to get bad decisions, at least part and parcel with the good ones, and you potentially, depending on how good you deal with corruption, you're going to have avenues for corruption. So I just want to say that it's not clear-cut that the government should be the one providing low-income housing. In other jurisdictions, they would set up the laws to encourage businesses to make more housing, and sometimes part of what gets housing cheaper is literally just the availability of it. If you want to stick up in Port of Spain, well then of course things in Port of Spain are going to just be expensive. Let's take the next comment. Should parental accountability be formalized in legislation, or should it remain a social expectation? I'll go first. I'll just say I have a fear that our societal norms are not keeping up with the times, and they're slowly breaking down. We don't have the village like what we used to have, so I don't know if we could bank on things being informal anymore, because we're already seeing certain things. It's my belief noise pollution was informally treated with, and it was successfully done so for years. and now it's not.
Yeah.
And there are other things like that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see some legislation to help curb that issue with
So
the
you're
noise
saying,
pollution.
right, for noise pollution, but for this, I think it should be formalized.
Well, of course,
You as well?
I am of that opinion in the sense that you're seeing the family structure, even the home structure breaking down. So you're seeing that the breakdown. So then who is going to hold parents responsible or children responsible for the actions they commit? Who is going to hold them responsible for the consequences they cause or they engage in when they commit these offenses? Who's going to hold them responsible?
Because I hate to say this, but to some extent, some of these kids, it's not as though the parents had a plan, right? This is, I want to have a child now, this is how I'm going to afford the child, and so on and so on. In certain cases, the pregnancy might be unplanned, the father might, or the mother, either parent might walk out. Like, there might be a whole host of things that just kind of happen that's not necessarily planned for, expected, but you're still responsible.
You're still responsible for the consequences of your actions. And if you accidentally, and I don't like to use the term accidentally because unplanned might be the better term.
Unplanned,
yeah. Unplanned might be the better term. And you get pregnant, you had that expectation. You had to remember, you have to understand there's an expectation of that happening. And then you have the consequences now. You have to take care of this child. This is a human being you're bringing into the world to interact with other human beings. And then you're not there supervising this human being.
Now, assuming the law is not draconian and it's a reasonable law, it will provide, because some part of it too is when you have unplanned teen pregnancies and the like, right? These things could cause major disruptions into a relatively young adult's development and career path. And it might be pertinent then now, okay, we have formalized it. It's no longer just a social expectation. So now parents could tell their kids, hey, when I say don't do this because you don't want to risk getting pregnant or making a girl pregnant, it is because there are now real consequences to it if you do it, as opposed to, well, people will frown upon it. I don't think the frowning upon it works in 2025 anymore.
Yeah, and I just want to remind persons that in 2021, the TTPS undertook a exercise where they taught approximately about 30,000 students to de-escalate arguments and confrontations and whatnot. And that was a very successful program. I think for a while there wasn't any issues during that. Yeah, in schools, especially during the COVID. Well, partly during the COVID.
Yeah.
And there are programs open to members of the public, parents, through the TTPS. One of them being like a community-based mediation center. And community police does police this and offer courses and lectures and assistance to lecture to students and children in terms of discipline and whatnot. They can even monitor the student if you want, or the child if you want. You have them go to the community police center, the community policing group, and a lot of the officers take a lot of time from their own lives to assist in these programs. So you see them after school programs, you see them taken, especially where I work at the transport branch, we had calls to provide a lot of transport to the community policing officers to take these children to a lot of youth activities, a lot of, what they call excursions and whatnot.
Right.
And the TTPS does facilitate that for students, for mainly the community-based groups.
One thing I wanted to get to back on the issue of police in schools. Yeah. If they have firearms, this is one aspect that I think, even though it might seem obvious to a lot of people, I wanna make sure that it's stated. Students need to understand, parents need to tell their kids, police officers might be armed. You don't know.
You don't know, and then
if you cause a physical altercation and the police officer has a gun, whether it's concealed or not concealed, the police officers have to give that a certain level of gravitas in that I can't let you mess around while I have a gun on my hip.
And then you have the case. Now, although it might be the educational policy not to have armed officers on a school compound, you have to understand as well that officers have to protect themselves in terms of, we have had cases where students are armed themselves. And not necessarily with firearms, with knives and bottles and broken objects that can harm somebody else. And we've seen it. I've actually seen injuries inflicted very badly upon other students. And we've had cause to come in and arrest, of course, the suspect and whatnot. And the officers need to be maybe armed. I don't know I don't know how they actually operate. If they are all armed, if one is armed or whatnot.
Yeah.
But in some cases they may be armed, and it's really for their own protection.
And it's not. Listen, don't assume that they're not armed. Don't because
and
the
it doesn't
officer
mean they don't have non-lethal avenues as well. They might have pepper spray. They might have what do you call the tasers and whatnot. And then they might have a baton. Because we have the flexible baton, it's compressed into a small one, and you can flick it out. And then you have the firearm as our last resort.
So the key is don't play Russian roulette thinking the police car hit me with the baton, or the police can't tase me. Like, depending on the situation, you don't know, especially if one student in a school brandishes a knife to police, all of a sudden now it is understandable that the police will be a little bit more wary with regards to students who may be looking to reach into a pocket or what have you.
And then you might have a group of students wanting to attack an officer, and he has to defend himself.
And if he has a gun, he's not going to kid gloves. You know what I mean?
No, but
or even if he has pepper spray or a taser, and a group of students is accosting him, he can't take it for granted that I could just...
Right, but in terms of the lethal weapon issue, he can't engage students with fists with a firearm.
Right.
So there are rules of engagement as well. We call it the use of force policy.
Right.
So you can't have an officer with an arm with a firearm shooting discriminately.
No. Yeah. I don't expect them to shoot. My point is that if you get into like a physical scuffle, the police officer has to protect the weapon from being removed from him, right?
You don't want that happening,
so he has a serious situation that he has to treat with.
And hence the reason the principals may not want armed officers on the compound.
Let's take the next comment as a follow-up to the question, how can schools and parents work together to prevent violent behavior before it happens? This is tricky because I think we lost the village. That doesn't mean that we lost other influences or community influences on the students. So it might not just be the schools and parents.
And then you're seeing cases where when teachers and principals take, and all the support services in the school take proactive measures to assist in disciplining the child, you see parents attacking these persons in the school. And recently you would have seen a video circulating where a parent actually walked up to a child and slapped him. Can't comment too much on that because it's probably under investigation still. However, you're seeing cases where parents and guardians leaving the lawful means of having to deal with the situation and taking the law into their own hands. And they would suffer the consequences because you can't walk up to a student who's unarmed, didn't attack you because you want to play bad John because he attacked your child and now you're coming to slap him up. Then you will be charged as a parent.
But also, doesn't it go back to what you were saying? Look at what you're teaching your child now. Well, no, if we have an issue, we don't first try to go, at the very least, listen, I understand there might be situations where you have to defend yourself, but a preemptive attack is outside the legal means. You should try the legal means.
I think parents play a very big role in how we discipline children and how we create how their mindset is. In terms of, I remember speaking to an officer last week, and he was telling me that we were talking about the rate of accidents on the nation's roadways now. And this is one thing that's important, especially as schools open now. You have a lot more students on the roadways, both pedestrians and traveling. And we see, there is the potential for more accidents, fatal accidents and whatnot. And he was telling me one of the first accidents he went on, there were 6 persons who were deceased. So this is a major fatal accident. And the impact it left on his life, he had to be, for the want of a better word, he had to be counseled. Hopefully he was counseled and to address that trauma. I remember as a young officer, maybe a year service, I remember going to the morgue to identify bodies that were involved in accidents, and they looked like they were sleeping. And as a young officer, 20 years, 21 years, you're looking at persons deceased because they didn't wear their seatbelts. And if we, in creating this mindset, understand that not because you're just sitting in the front seat of a vehicle, you should be wearing your seatbelt. When kids travel in my vehicle, they put on their seatbelt in the back seat too. Because if an accident occurs, and I don't know why this is in the law, But when an accident occurs, it affects the people in the backseat too.
Yeah.
You could fly through, a child sitting in the middle could fly through the windscreen if there's a sudden stop or a sudden accident and kill the child. So there's a fatal accident, or even any passenger, nonetheless.
Here's the catch. Here's the catch. Some people drive so fast, the seatbelt not going to save them,
Well,
right? But that goes to the fact that doesn't mean you don't wear the seatbelt. That means you
Right.
need
No,
to slow
but
down.
data has shown us in the TTPS
What?
that we've never had cause to pull a deceased person from a vehicle that had on the seatbelt.
Right.
They may have died after the accident.
Right.
When they were removed from the vehicle due to internal injuries.
Right.
But in terms of death upon impact,
At least surviving the impact.
yeah, we've never seen them. We've never seen that case. You would have died on impact because you didn't have on your seatbelt.
You see, I'll be frank. When I was a very small child, seatbelt,
You in the middle.
and you kind of climb in, right? But at the end of the day, it's not as though my parents drove in a manner that if they had to
Right.
tap on the brakes, I would have flown through the
And
windshield.
in thinking like that, we also have to understand that you may be driving very safely, but
But somebody
another
else.
driver is not.
No, but the thing is, and we've acknowledged it, because my nephews, when they were small, was not allowed to do that because it's a different time.
Yeah, it's a different
right? Like what we could do as a society if formerly in the 80s, we can't really have those
And
expectations
in the 80s,
now.
you had vehicles made out of real metal as opposed to now where it's made out of plastic.
And
you
also,
know?
I would also say that I don't think we had the road network for the
Yeah,
speeding that we
yeah.
do now.
So we would like to see that as the TTPS, we would like to see parents taking more caution on the nation's roadways, and not just the parents, the drivers of these vehicles. I think he spoke about vehicles in terms of the loud music.
Yeah.
But we need to also bear in mind how we transport our kids, especially, and if they are pedestrians as well, how we drive around them, because we want to lower the potential of any accidents occurring, fatal or otherwise.
Especially since some kids travel on their own. from
Exactly,
very young.
yeah.
Back to the question of the comment that we showed previously, how can schools and parents work together? I think part of it is just to be present, and for the parents and teachers, they have to be willing to communicate with each other openly. The parents have to be willing to be more involved in the PTA or in the school to get to know the teachers, and the teachers need to be willing to,
It's about engagement.
to engage with
Yeah.
the parents, right? To kind of receive that level of involvement and not to act as though, hey, this is my classroom. You have no place here. I don't need to talk to you to justify nothing. No, there needs to be open lines of communication, because the students, if they're up to no good, or even if they just don't know any better, they'll get away with things if there's a disconnect, because they could kind of maneuver in the in-between gaps. But there's another comment that the commenter put up, another question. What support systems does the government provide to help parents guide children away from violence? I know they do have counselors in schools.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could elaborate more.
Of course, so there are student support services where I've actually been in investigations where they brought it to our attention, where the child is being abused at home, being abused in school, and whatnot. And we've had to initiate investigations and charge persons for it. You have the safety officers who make sure that you follow the rules of the school. You have the dean, the principal, the teachers, and you have the community police-oriented officers, both the ones that are in the school and the community-based officers, community policing officers at the station level. And these officers at the station level and the community-based policing units, they are trained to offer these assistance. They spoke about NGO. There are NGOs. There is Childline 800-4321. There is beside Childline. There's some other NGOs that parents can seek assistance from to help guide these kids.
Usually these things you can find on the internet with a,
yeah, you can just type it in.
With a search. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be too hard to find.
No.
Right? There's a last thing I want to go to kind of combine multiple topics into one. To what extent do you think the economic burden on some families
it's great.
is pushing,
Yeah.
is making a difference? Because I said, when you have a parent that needs to
Yeah.
work 3 jobs,
Yeah.
when you don't have the village anymore, in part because the village also might have to work, a
3 jobs,
long
yeah.
job, 2 jobs,
Yeah.
3 jobs, right? Like, to what extent is the economic hardships having a negative impact on our youth.
Yeah.
Just from that alone, just from the development.
What we have experienced, we're actually seeing that there are parents who can't cope with it. They can't cope with it. They can't manage both home and work and whatnot. When a lot of cases, you're not seeing that. You're actually seeing both parents out of the household, working tirelessly at the end of the day, coming home hoping that their kids are well behaved, policing themselves, behaving themselves, and it's not the case.
So that's the key. You said both parents. So even in a double parent home, where both are present, the challenges are potentially
and then you don't have the grandparents there, like in a nuclear setting where they assist with the rearing of the children and whatnot. And then the parents might engage and pay a third party to watch their kid and whatnot, and watch their children, and there's a disconnect. There's a family disconnect. One thing we recognize too is that a child must fear their parents to some extent to keep that discipline.
Right.
Because it starts at a very early age. It doesn't start later on in life. I've actually seen kids behave very well in front of their parents as opposed to behind their backs.
Right.
And that is important, that this child understands who is in charge. Now, although corporal punishment is still lawful for parents to utilize, we don't encourage it in the TTPS because you may go beyond the normal.
And then you might also lose the child if you go too far.
We would have to take a child and place the child elsewhere and whatnot.
Sorry, when I say lose the child, not just that, but also you might cause the child to look at you differently, and the relationship might break
down. Because then you might beat that child out of anger. And when you beat the child out of anger, you create an anger issue. The child has issues. They can't overcome it. And they themselves become violent and whatnot. So we've actually seen that.
Right.
Violent parents or violent in parenting and violent ways of carrying out about the punishment causes the child themselves to become violent themselves. And you can see that. We see that. But what we need is for parents to understand at a very young age, your child needs to understand who is in charge. They must have that fear for you, and you would see a better discipline response from that child.
Yeah, I mean, it might sound harsh, and if you want to kind of put it more politely, it's either that they fear the consequences that you will give them, right? Or they might, if some parents kind of work it out where they fear disappointing their parents in a healthy way, but to say that, this is what you have to do, it's very difficult. Children are like all other parts of society. They're diverse. To say that one thing is a surefire silver bullet to solve the problems. No, you kind of have to know your child, engage with your child, and one of the key things also is to be consistent with your child. Have reasonable, consistent expectations. If you're wiffle waffle.
Yeah, I remember, and it does assist, especially the term you use. It's very important that a parent know their child. I remember we solved a case like that. The child was being exploited sexually by the school, by somebody in the school. And the child was being given higher grades than they normally achieve.
Like a hush situation, a hush money situation.
And the parent knew her child.
Right.
And the parent came to us and was like, no, sorry, they went to the child and was like, you don't make this kind of grades. Why are you making this type of grade? All of a sudden, you're doing a lot better than you usually do. And the parent was so suspicious, and eventually it evolved into a case where the child was being trafficked.
Trafficked as in
the child was
for
being trafficked.
Other people to be involved with, not just the member of staff.
No. So, and the member of staff was charged, but nonetheless, the child was being trafficked. All because the parent recognized that this child was not the child that they knew.
I mean, kudos to that parent, because it could have ended up totally worse way if the parent was,
because it was two students. It's just that this parent, one of the parents, recognized that her child was not that capable.
I just like to point out, you could see that storyline on Law & Order SVU, and you will still think, well, it can't happen here. And even if it happened in New York, that's like way too... No, apparently it does. Apparently it does.
It does
that might be a very odd point to end the show, but let's end the show there on that. At least justice happened in the end. I am beside myself. I know, right? I hope those two kids...
at the end of the day, child was still traumatized. whatever justice they might get or believe they get, at the end of the day, the child was traumatized.
I guess we could close with this. That's why you have to try from very early on to kind of figure out what is child appropriate ways to instill values in your children so that they will kind of know, okay, what is bad? What should I then now speak up about and not just be quiet and accept because I'm afraid and I don't know? Because a lot of kids don't know, and it's not easy. And you don't necessarily want your child to be willy-nilly accusing people of things that's not true. But to instill upon them like a proper sense of, hey, listen, this is what's right, this is not what's right. Just for them. They don't need to know the good and ills of wider society and why white-collar crime is bad and political corruption and all that. It's about them and their safety so that they will be a little bit better equipped, because the informal structures, it goes back to that question. I know that you were asking it about holding parents accountable, but it works in many ways, not just about holding parents accountable. The informal structures of what we took for granted in the past, we just can't take it for granted now anymore. That's unfortunate, but that is the reality that we have. Maybe we could regain that aspect of TNT back to some degree, but I will argue, as in many other societies, that ship has sailed. The price of progress, unfortunately. So with that said, I want to thank the commenters and the callers. Thanks, ASP Arun, for joining me once again.
No problem.
Heavy topic, especially towards the end, but maybe unnecessary conversation. Folks, just want to remind you to stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Never forget, it's nice to be nice so that we could see each other tomorrow. Sean Michael Small, this is Talking About the WESN, the content capital. Bye-bye.
WESN.